Thank you, Margaret. It's an honor to be here. Thank you for breakfast and for gathering this great crowd and for bringing these two iconic designers who really need no introduction. And when I was thinking about how I was going to introduce them, I was like, well, who am I going to do first? And I thought, I'm just going to go alphabetically by last name. So Norma Kamali is known for kickstarting the active leisure lifestyle concept in 1980, inventing the sleeping bag coat, which is the precursor to the puffer that we see everywhere around New York City, designing packable, easy-care jersey collections. Her high-heeled sneaker and her parachute clothing were featured in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And her swimwear is legendary. Norma is a recent recipient of the CFDA Lifetime Achievement Award for her innovative ideas and the landmarks she's created in the fashion industry. She dresses celebrities like Rihanna, Beyonce, Katy Perry, Rosie Huntington, Kendall Jenner, Lady Gaga, and many more. She designs for costumes for dance as well, including for Twyla Tharp and Sydney Lumet's The Wiz. I love that detail. She's won so many awards, I can't list them all, but some of them have been for her extensive involvement in public education and women's causes. And I know that she and Anna had a fabulous conversation last night, which we'll talk more about. Innovation is Norma's comfort zone. This season, she personally shot her collection with her iPhone. And she's just launched already the podcast. So I can't wait to talk to you more. Anna, you have the longest bio I've ever seen. So I'm going to abbreviate. Anna Sui's collections take you on a creative journey, mixing vintage style with her current cultural obsessions. She makes hip and exuberantly original clothes. Whether her inspiration is Victorian cowboys, Warhol superstars, or Finnish textiles, her depth of knowledge is always apparent. She's a true trendsetter to whom stylists and editors look for direction, and her show is always a highlight of New York Fashion Week. She's also currently the subject of a solo retrospective exhibition in London at the London Textile Museum. We believe it's the first time an American designer has been given a solo exhibit in London, and we all know what snobs they are, so what a huge accomplishment. So please welcome to the stage, long at last, Anna Sui and Norma Kamali. So thank you. So are you guys real friends?
Yeah. We are. Yeah. Norma's been my idol forever, and actually I moved to 53rd Street because she had a boutique on that block. So it's really true.
When did you meet?
I was a student, and Norma opened her boutique on 53rd Street.
Yeah.
So my roommate.
I'm so old.
My roommate worked for Norma, but I would always go hang out in the store, and then I think we just started talking. I remember one Christmas I couldn't go home for Christmas because I didn't have any vacation time, and so Norma kindly invited me over for Christmas dinner, and I just loved her.
Aww.
I love Anna, and I have to say there are very few real, true designers in our current life, and the ones that are authentic and have a passion for design are really stellar. And Anna lives, breathes, is passionate, is dedicated beyond, and you can tell in her work, in every detail of everything she does. And she's an incredible woman. So, you know, this is a great honor always to be with her. And I have such respect and I love her, and I'm so happy that her life is doing so well. And now she's like on fire. I mean, this is fantastic.
All right, so I can see my challenge is going to be to get each of you to speak about yourselves. I'm going to start with a question for both of you, and this time I'm going to ask Norma to answer first. You are both daughters of immigrants to America. How does your heritage influence your work?
I think...
Well, let's talk about your heritage.
Yes.
You're of Lebanese and Basque Spanish
Right.
descent.
Yes, well, my mother was Lebanese and my father Basque. So there's two rebellious, kind of crazy groups put together. And so there's a sense of urgency in being as good as you can possibly be in those cultures. And they're both fighters, and they believe deeply and are committed deeply to everything they do, both. And so my parents believed in assimilating, so I never learned Arabic and I never learned Spanish, and whatever Spanish I know is so scary that, but I, and I thought about why did they do that, and they wanted us to be so much a part of the community, and that we could find our way through being a part of the community. And I understand that decision, and I actually think it was a great decision. And it should be up to me to learn Arabic and Spanish on my own, but you
Never too late.
get these distractions. So I felt that influence throughout my career. I always thought about things my mother would say or how they would behave and the impact it's had on my behavior. So it's undeniable that their impact is there, and it's in our bloodstream too.
And Anna, your parents are both from China?
Yes, both my parents were born in China, but coincidentally they were both studying in Paris, and they met, they got married, and my father got accepted to University of Michigan for his master's degree. So they moved to Michigan. He spent his whole career working in Detroit, and my brothers and I were all born there, and I think that, you know, the main thing that I learned from my parents was courage and adventure, because to pick up and move to a foreign country, not really speaking the language, and, you know, really settling down and making a life for a family, I think took so much courage and so much bravery. I learned so much of like my father's work ethic. Like he would be up before dawn.
What did he do?
He's a structural engineer, and at the same company for his entire career, Smith Hinchman and Grill, which is a big engineering firm in Detroit. And I would see him like getting up early in the morning, leaving, and wouldn't come back till it was dark also. So, I mean, just to see that every day, that regime, and driving an hour and a half to Detroit. And my mom studied art. She was always very artistic, very crafty, so always had these projects going, and obsessive collector of stamps and coins. And so I think, you know, it was like such a nice balance that my father had this like really strong work discipline, and my mother had this kind of creative side and obsession with collecting. So I think I got a little of both.
And Anna, you're descended from this very lofty lineage of intellectuals and philosophers and diplomats and scholars. What did your parents say when you said you wanted to be a designer, and how did you get so influenced by rock and roll?
Well, my mother's reaction was, "You really want to be a dressmaker?" And I'm like, "Yes, I have to. This is what I want to do. This is what I really, really want to do." So, I mean, they were very supportive. Parsons was very expensive for them. My father took moonlighting jobs to pay for my tuition. So, I mean, and once I started doing fashion shows, they were front row, every show. My father took pictures. I have, like, a lot of the pictures in my book were pictures my father took of the runway or backstage. And growing up in Detroit, I mean, the first bands I saw were MC5 and Iggy Pop. I wasn't old enough to go to Grandy Ballroom, but there was a park, Heinz Park, and every Sunday they would have an outdoor park, so my brother would bring me. So, I mean, once you're exposed to that, like, you can't go back.
So a question that we ask all the time at Mary Claire is, how did you earn your first dollar? And can you, Norma, tell me how you earned your first dollar, and then whether or not it has anything to do with your business, how did you start your business?
Well, I earned my first dollar working in my stepfather's candy store. And
In New York?
In New York City. And I hated every minute of working in the candy store.
Retail is tough.
Because my friends would all come in, like, I want to go out and play. No. So, but I realized while I was in the candy, and it was a 50s candy store, because we're talking a whole other era, so it was actually the center of the universe for the neighborhood. And And my job was to help customers, clean, do whatever. And I found my place there. I found what I knew I could do. So the first thing I did was arrange all the candy bars by color and by size. Drove my father crazy.
Oh my God.
The pretzels by size, and everything was magazines by color and the size of the magazine.
Oh
The
my God.
newspapers made sure they were all straightened and the.
Can you come to my house?
So I realized I had this obsessive kind of behavior that just drove everybody crazy, but the candy store always looked good. And I learned how to sell, and I learned how to make New York City egg creams, in case any of you don't even know what that is.
Oh my God.
I can make a serious egg cream. And I also realized I was lactose intolerant, so I couldn't eat anything in the candy store.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so thank goodness, because, you know, that would have not been nice. So that was my first real, you know, work ethic. I had to do it. It was part of what I had to do. The family, my brother did too.
And you went straight from there to puffer coats?
And no, I had a lot of jobs, and my family didn't have a lot of money. It was possible that I may not go to college, may not have, and I wanted to be a painter. And so in order to buy paint supplies, I had to do jobs to earn that money. And so I worked very hard to save money so I could buy supplies for my classes, my art classes. And I loved it so much that I would have done, you know, I worked in some of the craziest jobs, but it paid to get me through school. And then you asked about my...
How'd you start the business? And I know there are a couple of iterations, but I really want to hear about the birth of IMACMFOMO.
Well, that's a little later on. But so I tried, I went to FIT. I have 2 scholarships. I got a scholarship to FIT, and my mother said, you better take that one because that might be a real job. Painting is not going to do it. And I said, okay. So I figured I would be a fashion illustrator. My instructor, Anna Ishikawa, who I will thank for the rest of my life, who's just had the most impact on my life, most powerful. She was very strict, very tough, but she helped me put together a portfolio I was very proud of. I told one of my objectification stories last night where I went on a job interview in the garment industry, and I was told, as I go into this office, the guy's got his feet up on his desk, he's eating a tuna sandwich, and he says, young lady, put your portfolio down over there, come here and turn around for me. And I turned around because he was the power in the room, and then I was so humiliated. I was in tears, and I ran out, and I said, I can't work in this industry. It's not for me. I got a job in an airline selling reservations online. Not online, on the phone. And,
always at every time.
But I was working on a computer. At the time, this is the 60s, I was working on a Univac computer. Anyway, travel back and forth to London every weekend, $29 round trip. All of a sudden, there's this burst of color in London on King's Road. And I said, what is that? And it was the beginning of everything. And so I traveled every weekend. I would bring back clothes for friends. Then I opened the store, then Anna knows, and I started selling them there, and I started making clothes myself. So that's how it started. $285 a month rent.
Wow.
With my ex-husband, Eddie Kamali.
I know you've been talking a while, and we need to get to
Yes,
you, but
yeah.
I just want to hear the IMA. So then you started the store when you were still married.
Yes. So later on, I did a T-shirt that you remembered, and so I've been doing empowerment T-shirts for a while, and I did one way back. I don't know if you remember, Mary Lou, but it was IMA CMFOMO. And so I had to clean it up a bit. So it was, I am a cool modern female on my own. That's when I went on my own, but you all know what that really means. And so we're gonna resurrect that one again. Thank you for reminding me. Okay.
Anna, how did you make your first dollar, and how did you start it?
Well, besides babysitting, my first job was working in a dry cleaner. And I
Which was more lucrative?
Well, the dry cleaner paid minimum wage, so. But I loved working at the dry cleaner because there were a few women that had designer clothes, and they would bring them in, and I couldn't wait till they came in on Saturday. And that's where I saw some of my first designer clothes. There was one woman that wore a lot of Courrèges and Tifo, and so it was just like so exciting for me. My whole love has always been fashion and clothes, and I think every dollar that I made at that dry cleaner I spent on clothes for myself. So.
And then you had this great story when we spoke earlier about how you kind of came up during the time of the 80s and the big power suits and the full look Chanel, Versace, etc. And you had a reaction to that.
Well, I started my own business in 1981, and it was by accident, and it was just a small collection. And my first stores were Macy's and Bloomingdale's, which were the big fashion stores at that point. And little by little, every season, I would make a bigger collection, a bigger collection, a bigger collection. And finally, like by the late 80s, one of my big supporters was Barney's, and they had started Co-op, and the whole contemporary market opened up. But I had never been to the shows in Paris, so my friend Stephen Meisel said, well, why don't you come with me to Paris this time? And the first show we went to, we stopped at the Ritz and we picked up Madonna. And
as you do.
When we walked into a room, it was racks and racks and shopping bags from every designer in Paris. And I was like, oh my God, it must be good to be Madonna. And she came walking out of her room and she had a coat on. So we get in the car, get to the show. The hustle and bustle of getting to the show with Madonna was crazy. And then we finally sit down in the front row, and she takes off her coat and she leans over and she's like, Anna, I have a surprise for you. And she was wearing my dress. So that was one of the most important things that happened that gave me confidence, because when we came back to New York after that trip, Stephen said, okay, now it's your turn. You have to do a show. And that was so daunting because this was power dressing time, the height of Chanel, Versace. I mean, like how you compete. Like I think just had moved out of my apartment and started with a small section of a floor in the garment center. So it was a daunting time.
And what gave you, you obviously didn't imitate what you were seeing. You told me that you'd seen some street style.
Yeah. So, socially I knew Naomi and Linda and Christy because of Stephen, and they would come over head to toe in designer clothes straight off the runway, and I'd be dazzled. And suddenly that summer I realized things were changing because Naomi was wearing a pair of flare jeans and a vintage top, and there was a model making these beautiful chokers. And I thought, maybe there's room for me here. Maybe this is more my thing. And actually for couture that summer, Linda took a bunch of my dresses and she was wearing them in Paris, and I kept getting phone calls from all the models, can you send me a dress, can you send me a dress? And to the point where I heard Carl complained and said, Anna, who's this Anna? Because he kept seeing my label in the clothes. So those were the contributing things that I thought, well, maybe there's a chance. And all my friends kind of rallied and really supported me, and Linda and Naomi helped me get all the other models, and Stephen and Paul Cavacco really kind of held my hand through the whole thing.
So you were thinking, wow, it's good to be Madonna, and I'm sitting here thinking, wow, it's good to be Anna Sui. So we're going to break a shake again. Norma, can you please tell the story of your famous sleeping bag coat, which, by the way, is featured in our December issue of Marie Claire.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to show you.
So this is the early 70s, and I was camping, a real camper every weekend with a whole group of friends. We would go up to Narrowsburg, New York, and then canoe down the Delaware River, if any of you have been there. And I'm obsessed with canoeing, and I love that life. However, it's not as compatible to my career, but there was a side of me that loved it. And so we would go camping every weekend, and of course we had tents and sleeping bags and all of the kind of gear. And one night it's freezing, and I definitely had to go to the bathroom, and I was like, I am not getting out of my sleeping bag. So I just unzipped it, wrapped it around me, and I went into the woods. And as I'm going, I'm thinking, oh my God, this is a great coat. And I was on my way back, and my friend Bob Curry said to me, you are making a coat out of that. I said, so done. So I go back home, I take my sleeping bag, and I couldn't wait to come back. I cut it, and I didn't waste a piece of it. I used every section, collar, sleeves, the whole thing. And that pattern is still the same pattern for the classic sleeping bag coat. And I've made the coat every year since then.
And how did it take off? What was the reaction to it?
It was actually, so this is hippy-dippy time. This is, it's like clothes were really sort of whatever you wanted them to be. So there wasn't a uniform. It was fabulous. Everybody just wore whatever. So there was an audience for that, and I had already sort of established a little bit of a cult identity, not on purpose for sure, but so people wouldn't be surprised if they saw that. And the coat just kept selling. So I bought one sleeping bag after another, and then I actually learned that the way the coats were made, and I didn't use down, and I learned that the way the coats were made was using a NASA principle where you have two coats and an air pocket between, and the reason you stay so warm is that the heat from your body exchanges with the cold from outside in that air pocket. So from that, then we've built every coat since then on that principle.
And is NASA the reason you somehow got to parachute fabric?
Actually, the parachute came, I don't know if he even told you this story, but the parachute was an interesting story. There was a guy who worked for Halston, who was his designer, and he hung out in my store on Madison all the time. And I just did a swimsuit that sort of had a very high leg and did this wrap thing, and
we're familiar with it.
And I see it on the cover, and this is, 70s. I see it on the cover of Time magazine, and I thought, that's Halston's name on my swimsuit. So I was very hurt because he designed for Halston, and I'm sure Halston had no idea whatever occurred. And I was so hurt and disappointed, but I was used to being knocked off, and I was just sort of sitting with it and saying, you know what, I have another idea, I'll move on. So he called me, and he was very apologetic, and he said, I'm so sorry, I owe you big time. He said, Halston's going to be away this weekend. You have to come to his house. I have a surprise for you. I said, I'm not going to Halston's house. And he said, please, you have to do this. So I go, and I don't know if any of you have seen pictures of Halston's house, but it was quite spectacular in its elegance and simplicity. And the whole center opened up to a skylight, and beneath that was a round ottoman and balcony from the second floor. So he dropped the parachute on my head and said, I know you'll do a lot with this. So that's where the parachute came from. So you can have all the Time magazine covers you want. That was the best gift ever. So I, of course, had to make him a jumpsuit first. That was the deal.
And how did you get back to, but everyone knows that's your bathing suit now, your swimwear.
Well, now, I mean, Time, certainly helps where people then recognize that it is yours. But when you're a designer and you own your own business and you don't have the power of a big corporation to push the information out, the risk is that other people will profit from what you've done. And so it's happened to me in my career, and I always thought to myself, I'm not afraid of that because I know I have another idea. Maybe they don't, and that's fine. But I never held on to it for too long. If it did, I would think I would create another idea so I could get over it. And so I realized that the choice in owning your own business and being the final word for me was more important than having partners or a big corporation telling me what to do. So that's the downside, but the upside is I've had creative freedom my entire life, so I wouldn't change that.
So you both have been fiercely independent from the beginning, which I love. What's your definition of a successful collection? Is it that it's like the perfect idealization of your idea, or is it that it sells out? Anna.
Oh, that's so difficult. It's like you have these hurdles every season where first you have to come up with a concept and build the fabrics, the color, the mood around it. And that's maybe the hardest thing because you just never know where that inspiration is going to come from. And you just pray that something's going to hit you and will see you through that 6 months. So once you start that, then it's just really concentrating on keeping focused on that concept. Then you have the challenge of the show and the reviews. So I remember in the early days, my dad and I would get up really early the next day after my show and run to the newsstand and get all the papers and see what people thought. Now you get that a little more quickly on your phone. But then the next challenge is really the stores. And again, it's changed so much. In those days, there were stores that you knew would support you because you've had a relationship with them. It's much more difficult now. People change jobs so often that you're not able to build those relationships anymore. So it's almost like starting from scratch every couple of years with every store, every online store. You know, it's a different time. So it's hard to say like what makes it a success because you can have great reviews and then not sell. You can sell really well and not have great reviews. So it's like, you know, I guess to me the important thing is really that concept and kind of expressing what it is that I want to say for the season, than really the other two things.
It's really kind of the question as we were talking about is fashion art? Norma.
That's a really tough question. I think fashion, I'm going to start by answering the first question that you asked, Anna, which is it the best charge if it's something you loved and feel creatively was very innovative and exciting and really hit the mark for you, or is it if it sells? And I think that the real answer is both, that if you can do that and people love it, then wow, that you did something really good, and it isn't as great if only 3 sold, but it was fabulous. But so I think there's that part of it. I think fashion is an art form. It is an art form, but it's its own art form. So we can't compare it to a painting or another type of art. There's the art of fashion is how this garment, whatever it is, it could be a pair of sneakers, it could be a brilliantly designed pair of sneakers or a brilliantly designed wedding gown. If it's special in what it is doing, in how it was designed, how it's interacting with a human being, and how other people respond to it, that art form is expressed at its ultimate then. So I think I see art and fashion all the time, but it has to be understood as its own art form.
How are we doing on time, guys? Because I have so many questions. You guys are so smart and interesting. We're good.
Fine. You have, I would give them, I mean, you can keep talking for another 5 or 10 minutes and then 5 minutes or so for questions.
Okay. I always love getting direction from
It's
Margaret.
only 20 minutes.
It's good. Margaret knows the rules. I mean, you gotta. So I'm gonna go to these like rapid fire questions that we do at Mary Claire that I love. They're it's sort of like an old game show where I'm just gonna, it's like immediate, what first comes to your head, and we're gonna go back and forth. You're each gonna answer, but you each get a chance to answer first. So, Anna, what are the last 3 things on your credit card statement?
Shoes and clothes.
Norma.
Wellness, wellness, wellness.
Oh, right, which we didn't talk about. You've been into wellness. You're like the first person ever into wellness, right?
Well, maybe not the first, but I think
Before winning.
a little bit. I think wellness is a part of fashion now, because how we feel about ourselves and what we're putting in our bodies and how we're living is critical to the way our attitude now, our physical attitude and our presence. And being healthy is the most important thing for anybody right now. The amount of stress we have in our lives is overwhelming. It's like never before. I think since 9/11, there's a new definition of stress. So having wellness as a part of your life and as part of your family's life is required. And I think it's a new definition of beauty too. Healthy is beautiful. So yes, wellness products.
A quick diversion. You really do exercise every single day, don't you?
I do. When you're 72, you have to exercise every day. Like, you have no choice. If you want to feel good about your body and feel strong in your body, and I love it too. It's not something you want to do every day, but if you do it after, you are so grateful that you've given yourself that.
Have you already exercised today?
No. I'm a late. I'm better in the afternoon at night.
Huge diversion, sorry, but it's fascinating. Anna, no, you did first last time. So, Norma, what brings you the greatest joy?
Giving other people joy, making women feel good, I think has been my job in my lifetime. And as I mature, I realize that that's really ultimately what I'm meant to do, and I love it.
Anna, what brings you the greatest joy?
My family and my friends, and the ability to do my work, because I love my work.
Anna, do you have a secret talent? Are you like a really good whistler or something?
I sound so shallow shopping. If somebody asks me, like, where do you get this? I can tell them.
Oh, yeah. It is a talent. Norma, your secret talent.
My secret talent. Yikes. Everything I do is what I do, so it's not a secret. I don't have any secrets, I don't think.
What are your vices, Norma?
My vices. I think my vice is not knowing how to say no to things, projects that look like so much fun, and there's just no room on the plate. Of course, there's somebody at the table over there who's shaking her head. Yes. She works at my company. They look at me every Monday. Oh no, we have the weekend to think of something.
Anna, what are your vices? What is your one vice?
Well, again, shopping. I mean, these guys know, they shop with me. It's it's like, do we have half an hour? Can we run over to the antique store? Is there a flea market in town? You know, it's like, that's kind of my obsession, I guess.
What is your go-to karaoke song? And if you don't do karaoke, what would be your go-to karaoke song?
Ooh.
And do you do karaoke?
I don't do karaoke, but I'm trying to think, what do I try to sing? It's like, I'm the worst singer, so it's really got to be in private. Right?
Norma?
I love karaoke. I don't care.
This is a secret talent.
Well, I spent a lot of years in Japan. We both have, and so you do karaoke. And so I love it, and I have a lot of songs. Any Etta James. I'm an Etta James freak. I love her, and I love blues, and so any great blues song, I'm there.
So let's talk about Japan for 1 second, actually. This is an unintended, brilliant segue. You're both huge in Japan. What do you attribute that to?
I mean, I think the journey's been amazing in Japan because when the Japanese stores used to come to my showroom, I remember the first buyer we spent a lot of time with, and then suddenly he said to me, "But you're Chinese. A Chinese designer will never happen in Japan." He stood up, and I have these tables that kind of have these leaves that stick out, and it stabbed him right in the leg. So the next group of people came, Isatan, and I was so fortunate the president of Isatan fell in love with my collection, and I had been given a lot of offers for distribution, and it was so hard to decide, but along with that offer were 14 licenses, and that kind of helped establish me in not just in Japan but throughout Asia.
How did you get to Japan?
I had a 28-year license in Japan, and I was there 4 times a year, and I fell in love with Japan. I'm just the biggest fan. Everything they do, the way they do just about anything is totally committed in detail, and I feel very connected to the Japanese people for some reason and to the culture. I learned a lot from Japan. I learned a tremendous amount of my first years going. My dear friend Bob Curry, who's no longer with us, was also doing the Hanamori store, which was sort of like the little department store at the time, and he totally designed her store, and the two of us were obsessed with everything Japanese, and we really immersed ourselves in the culture, and I am so grateful for that experience. I don't have the license anymore, but we do sell to Japan, and people have asked me about re-entering again in a license like that. And I'm not sure that I can physically do another thing, but it is enticing because I just want to go back, have a reason to go back.
So you guys both have talked about all of these fabulous friends of yours, and a lot of them are famous, as are you guys. What do you think how do you feel about the role of fame and maybe also social media in fashion? Is it essential? Like you talk about Madonna wearing your dress took.
I mean, I'm very private, so I think it took me many years to even talk about that. So, but now it seems that everything is online, every movement, every thing happening. So I'm trying to embrace it, but it's been a challenge for me to kind of talk about my friends, talk about private life. You know, it's just not what I was used to. So it's new.
I think I feel like Anna for many years. I felt very comfortable not being in front at all. I mean, I still love being behind the scenes. I much rather take your photo than you take mine. But I know that I have a lot to communicate now at this point in my career, and I know what people want from me. And if my objective is to share all of the information I have for women, I need to do that. I need to come out front. As I experiment on Instagram, I realize if I do a simple exercise, people are so interested and they're so fascinated by it that it's giving me information about what my role is now and what I need to share. So it's been very helpful for me. But like Anna, intuitively, we both are not that personality. We understand celebrity, and we don't really. I'm speaking for you, Anna,
No,
but
it's
we
true.
don't.
Yeah,
We
it's
don't
very true.
see ourselves as celebrities, and if we're addressed that way, it's like, are you talking to me? Well, I had the great honor to work for Walmart for 3 years. I had a license with them, and it was like Walmart University, and I learned about sustainability there, and the initiative they have and how much there is to learn. So they would demand that their suppliers used all of the guidelines that Walmart set up. So for instance, if I was producing this coat in a factory and the labels that went into the coat were beyond a certain distance, I wasn't allowed to use that other supplier. I had to find one closer so that there would be less of a carbon footprint. The other would be what transportation. So for instance, there was a company that delivered milk to Walmart. They were forced to be innovative and change the round bottle to square bottles so they could get more bottles into a truck. So my takeaway was how can I use the mammoth kind of Walmart enforcement in my own company. And it's harder when you're a smaller company, and it's harder to enforce every part of it. But if you take one project at a time, and they're different all the time. I'm looking more and more into recycled fabrics now, and there's a lot of innovative work being done with that. So that's a new initiative for me, and then training my factory on how to use it. Some new techniques in manufacturing and sewing that really reduce that sort of keeping it sustainable and reduce some of that excess that isn't needed. I think half the battle is being consciously aware of it. We haven't in the past, so it makes it difficult to have a goal. But I think what needs to be done is there needs to be more guidelines that we could all follow. I'm sure we would all, if this is what you have to try to do, we would try to do it. We're still grappling in our company with paper and plastic, It's like the guy comes, cleans up, he's like, what is with everybody? Put the paper in the plastic. So we're still, it's not just my company, but we're all trying in the same way to put the paper in the paper. We're trying with sustainability. And there'll be a louder voice, and it is a great question, and we need to keep talking and bring awareness.
Well, I think a lot of people have heard that my great cause is really saving the Garment Center. I think that it's a difficult battle, but it's such a delicate balance now with our suppliers, with keeping our contractors busy, keeping them in a space within the Garment Center. I'm going through that challenge now too. I have to move to another building because the rent is tripling. So I think that there's so much that I've gained from being in that area, I think that I learned my resources there. We consciously give work to our embroiderer in New Jersey every season, just so that they know they're going to have that work. We consciously distribute the sewing within all the contractors that we work with, again, to keep them balanced. Same with our textile suppliers, thread people, even the snaps and buttons. It's such a fragile balance right now, because I've seen it go from like way too many resources to now there's barely any, and I think that's important to me, is to try to maintain that as long as we can and help balance it out within that community.
If you choose to, more questions from you guys, so think of a question, I'll ask this one. If you choose to buy, say, the snaps from someone in the garment center, is that economically more efficient than buying them from China?
Not necessarily, no. And I guess that's part of the challenge of trying to make something affordable. But then there's the convenience and of running across the street and getting it done, not like having to ship it here and ship it there and wait for it to come back. And so I think that that's how I learned how to make clothes. Same with embroideries. I mean, yes, it can be cheaper made in China, but then there's a certain amount of archival information that I'm familiar with here. I love going into archives and seeing what techniques are available. And again, it's the challenge of developing that pattern, but also now it's a challenge to find the colors that you need, because again, those suppliers are disappearing. So I think that it's a difficult battle. It really is.
I think they exist because our industry isn't on point on deliveries and when we show. And we're still in an old, crazy concept. So if you go out on the street and ask somebody, so what season would you say June is in? They would say summer. If you ask somebody in the fashion industry, ladies, what season is June? So we're
delivery time, right?
So we're not on the right path. They are, because they understand to get the product to people when they are looking on Instagram, on every device, seeing things instantly, and if they have to wait, it's over. You lost it. So they know, well, let's get it to them right away and get it at a great price, and they're doing it successfully. So, congratulations to them. So it's up to us. Now, for us, we're part of an industry that has a calendar, and that calendar, and it's a very challenging shift, but we have to come together as an industry. The department stores have to rethink why they're doing that. I mean, wait a minute, is this really still what we need to do? It doesn't make sense. We know it. We don't shop like that anymore. And they have to make a brave move. And when the stores make a brave move, it's easier for the industry to shift. But the stores may not do it. So the industry is going to end up having to do it anyway. And it's better if we could all do it together. I don't know, I'm not the genius that's going to figure this out, but I think it takes a lot of us to get together to create a level playing field. So Anna produces something, H&M looks at it and says, or Zara says, we're going to do that, and they get it out right away. Well, if she can get it out in that same amount of time from the time that it's shown and the calendar all works, then it's fair. Then it's a real fair situation. I think we have to do things, and maybe you have some ideas on it, but I think that that's the bigger problem. It's not that they're copying, it's just they're brilliant. They're brilliant and they understand the world we live in right now.
Well, I have a different take on that because I talked about when Japan discovered me. So once I signed that deal with Isetan, I actually went to Japan for meetings, and that week Tokyo was flooded with 300,000 Anna Sui t-shirts, counterfeit Anna Sui t-shirts, that I saw in every lobby of every office building, on the street corners, like everywhere. And I was destroyed. I thought, like, oh my God, like, how do I compete with this sort of thing? But then I realized, in retrospect, that it made me so famous. Like, it extended beyond where I could go. And so I think it's again, how you look at it. And, you know, things like that have happened from Forever 21, et cetera, you know. But you have to look at it a different way because that's part of our industry. I think that Norma's absolutely right, that the seasons need to change. And I think that, you know, we need the support of retailers and fashion calendars, and it needs to change. It doesn't make sense. I mean, it's 80 degrees in October. You know, it's like, doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it's a big problem. And, you know, we're opening summer pre-fall. Well, it's not summer pre-fall.
By the way, what is pre-fall?
So if we're talking about an April-May delivery, that's spring. So all week we've been having this discussion, and we sit there and I said, you've got to talk to buyers that are coming in and say, look at the clothes as if they are spring, because that's what you want to sell during that period. And it's like, no, they're going to give us, and it's like, then just tell them, take them out on the street right in front of the store and just a passerby. What is April, May to you? What season would you call that? And then have the discussion, because we cannot keep pretending that that's summer pre-fall. It's not. So we want to sell clothes in the season, and we know now that when we have the clothes for a season, they're not selling as well because they don't connect with the season. But we keep doing an insane thing. I cannot do it anymore. I'm like, enough. So I'm fighting with my sales staff every day, saying, I don't care what the buyers say. You tell them, you're not crazy. They can't be crazy. They can't do this. So it's a real, and it's not hard to convince you guys, because you guys feel the same way. But the elephant has to turn around, and we have to really make that change.
One is, I wish that, and the other is, in another life, I would. And you can choose one of those. And then I think we're going to wrap up, right? Yeah.
Okay, I can answer the last question. In another life, I wish I was a rock star.
You are a rock star.
No schedules. You can do an album whenever you want. You can wake up whenever you want. You know, I think that I think one of the things that's so unusual about being a fashion designer is that we have to design on schedule, and that's such a challenge. It's like, I think it's one of the only creative fields that you have to do that on schedule, and it's hard.
I wish that we could stop the objectification of women around the world. I am committed to this. Objectification is a worldwide experience for every woman on the planet, and I will add gay men as well. We've been experiencing this since the beginning of time, and objectification wears away at our self-esteem. The numbers of times we're objectified in our lives is hundreds and hundreds, and women have to start cleansing. Those secrets are devastating to who we are, our character, and our worth. And in order to reach our potential, we have to free ourselves of these humiliating, embarrassing, painful situations. And by sharing your stories, you free yourself, you cleanse, and you inspire your friends to do the same. And so I ask you all to start going deep into those dark crevices where there's a lot of pain, and start talking about it. We don't hate men. We are not blaming them for their lack of understanding of how we feel. Some of them are idiots and jerks, and they will be shamed, but we don't want to shame every man. We just want him to know what it feels like to feel objectified. And especially the men that love us, when we tell them, they will become our biggest advocates. So we want the men to help us change the world. If every woman in the world told one story of objectification, that would be the change in the end. So I hope you guys can start talking.